I'm Sharon Shea Bossard. It's a pleasure to be a part of virtual IBAM, and I welcome this opportunity to introduce my latest book, Veil of Silence. Set in the 1950s to the late 1980s, this memoir explores my experiences growing up in a flawed Chicago-based Irish family. It's written in the third-person point of view in order to take that emotional journey, viewing my family through a child's eye. I am Sherry, and this is my story. 1958. 12-year-old Sherry lowers her pencil and stares into the kitchen. Her mother scurries about, preparing her father's dinner. She hopes she's not asked to clean up afterwards, for she avoids time alone with her unpredictable father. The dining room table provides the perfect observation point with its direct line of sight into the kitchen. Listening in on her parents' bristling conversation, she wonders why they ever moved from suburban Riverside, Illinois, to this one-horse town of Norristown, Pennsylvania. Their parents are not any happier, and their family seems more broken than ever. My parents were married at St. Clement Church in Chicago in 1938, a private affair, no attendants, no flowing wedding gown, but street clothes and a lovely corsage is what we see in their wedding photo. To the outside world, they appeared happy. It was the kind of photograph that they might be proud to display, but no wedding photos were ever seen gracing the walls or cluttering the side tables of our home. My siblings and I have no memory of ever celebrating their wedding anniversary, nor did we know the date of their marriage. Another oddity was that we never knew the date of my father's birth, so we never celebrated his birthday, and as such, my mother's birthdays came and went with little fanfare. There were no relatives visiting our home, and we received no invites to my mother's dysfunctional family gatherings. That was just our way of life. I never dreamed it to be a tale of longing or betrayal. It was just the way it was. My parents were first-generation Irish Americans, both of them broken, scarred from devastating childhood experiences. I'd like to think that my father's ambitions were to provide a comfortable life for my mother, and that it was my mother's desire to create her own family that propelled them to the altar. As a small girl, I should have connected the whispers and snippets of intrigue, but didn't. My father never talked about his Irish-born parents, who I later learned immigrated from County Kerry to New London, Connecticut in 1880. We never knew my father had 6 brothers and sisters. He never surprised us with a birthday card or a gift. He was absent on holidays, preferring the company of others. My father never said I love you. He wasn't one of those fun dads who spun you around by your arms until you were dizzy. He didn't build Sherry a go-kart or dance with her. He didn't talk much, nor did he inflate her ego in any way. Mostly, she'd catch a glimpse of him at the kitchen table during his late-night dinners, and maybe on a Saturday afternoon, when he'd sit on the front room couch reading the paper or watching TV news with his scotch and soda cocktail. His wool trousers felt rough on her cheek, but she stayed with her head on his lap, just to be close to him. My mother dutifully performed her solitary responsibilities with as much enthusiasm as possible, but by the end of the evening, she'd find comfort in the alcohol that numbed her brain, destroyed her spirit, offering her the comfort so needed from the daily grind of raising her 4 children. Chicago, 1954. It's Friday night, and like clockwork, her drinking begins after dinner with the excuse of doing laundry. This excuse gets her to that secret place, her lone space, in the shabby, unfinished basement, with its cracked walls bleeding moisture from the outside. The alcohol deadens her mind, poisons her spirit. With liberal doses, she staggers through her weekends. Does she even notice her children? They're trapped in a world that frightens them, causing them to feel overwhelmed with emotions, both scary and threatening. They look to their mother to protect them, to provide comfort and safety, yet she's the one who creates their pain. We knew my mother's mother, our Irish-born grandmother, Sarah Healy, who immigrated with her soon-to-be husband in 1903 from County Roscommon, settling in Chicago. Every other weekend in the early 1950s, my 3 siblings and I would fill the back seat of our Ford sedan, leaving our home in the suburb of Riverside to visit our grandmother on Orchard Street in Chicago. Our visits, always a disaster. The mood, always hurtful. Chicago, 1954. Our grandmother Sarah called the beer orders into the corner liquor store. The delivery guy arrived at their back door within minutes, loaded down with quart bottles of Blatt's beer and maybe an orange crush or two for the kids. Sarah shoved fistfuls of dollars into the fellow's shirt pocket. A hefty tip for arriving before their last drops were spent. The more they drank, the more verbally abusive they became. As kids, we thought this was normal, but this family was anything but. Normal to them was drink, insult, and cry, and not always in that order. And we, as kids, stayed outside, away from the fray, but within earshot of the abuse. Chicago, 1955. Her grandmother Sarah sits like the Queen of Heart, the foul-tempered monarch from Alice in Wonderland, quick to order death sentences at the slightest offense. Harsh discipline was the norm. Kids were seen and not heard, while the adults' bad behavior went unchecked. Their drinking scary, their behavior towards each other dangerous. My mother, always emotionally battered. So jealous they were of her beautiful home in Riverside and her seemingly happy marriage. This malignant, shameful behavior dangerously deprived everyone of emotional support and growth. And of course, the Catholic nuns provided little comfort for any child having a rough go of it. St. Clement High School, Chicago, 1961. Sherry and her classmates stand single file in the prison-hued corridor. They're told to face the wall. It's the day Sister Faith checks the girls' legs to make sure each of them wears nylon stockings. Some of the girls have been known to draw seams down the back of their legs using a black Maybelline eye pencil. Others wear old ready stockings with runs and holes. Sherry's unprepared for this impromptu inspection and regrets she has provided the nun with yet another opportunity to mete out harsh punishment. The loud clicking noise of the nun's rosary beads can be heard over the scuffling sounds of her black leather shoes on the tile floor. Sherry stands at the end of the line, sweating bullets, knowing she won't pass inspection. A sharp, heavy, musty odor signals the nun's presence. Sister runs her hand down her victim's leg. Sherry winces from the feel of Sister Faith's cold, bony hand and moves away in response to the groping. Flushed with victory, the nun demands she collect her things and leave for the day. Sherry sees that her sister Bonnie has also been dismissed. They're told to return tomorrow wearing nylons. The girls discuss their punishment and wonder why the other offenders weren't sent home. Maybe it's because Sherry and Bonnie can't afford the regulation school uniforms. Or perhaps the fact they are charity cases. At every turn, they're reminded of the poverty, the desperation, the turn their lives have taken. It all seemed like an adventure when they escaped Norristown, Pennsylvania with their mother for Chicago. Sherry thought their lives would be much the same, minus their fathers and brothers. But instead of life as usual, they find themselves with very little money, barely enough to eat, and now must worry about the expense of nylons in order to return to school. It's only when my granddaughter began asking questions about my life as a child that I began to think about the past and how it impacted me and my siblings. Digging into the past, recording my life in this memoir, that challenge seemed unsurmountable until one day I decided it had to be done. So where do you begin? How much information is enough to fill their curiosities? Was I ready to write the hard stuff? A great novelist, Frank Kafka, said, "A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. We have to be brave, embrace ourselves for the truths we'll discover." This memoir, Veil of Silence, took on a more complex dimension as I delved into the emotionally charged environment of my childhood. I tripped over parts where truths were too painful. I grazed over them and moved on, until my writers group challenged me to dig deeper, tell more, agreeing There's always more to the Irish story. My siblings and I learned at a very young age that to be Irish meant to be firm and brave, as heartbreak was a stone's throw away. I knew little of my family background except that they lived terribly sad lives. What I did learn at a very young age from arguments, rumors, and whispers was that to be Irish meant to be defensive and secretive. The only advice my mother ever gave me was never marry an Irishman, and if I did, I deserved all the misery I'd get. Growing up, I'd witnessed my mother lose herself in the euphoria of alcohol in order to catch a break from her own daily paranoid delusions that grew worse over time. Her solitary journey dumped feelings of powerlessness and helplessness onto her 4 vulnerable children. And we stayed silent, terrified that if we let that veil of silence drop, we'd no longer be loved. Columbus Hospital, Chicago, 1975. Dusty sunlight filters in through the blinds. The room is stuffy with an undertone of bleach. The hospital's head nurse makes it clear that Sherry will be escorted from the premises and she's not to return. Her mother has somehow convinced the staff that Sherry poses a grave danger, so they do her mother's bidding. Sherry's hands tremble as she reaches for the door handle. Her mother has pulled the wool over everyone's eyes for years with her tales of trauma and victimhood that never materialized. Sherry discovered long ago the repetition of her themes, her script. She's accustomed to her mother's fluctuating moods. Her mother plays the part of the persecuted victim to perfection, easily inventing new monsters in her desperate need to survive the twin demons of alcohol and mental illness. My journey began with the completion of my first book titled Finding My Irish, published in 2005. Copies flew off the shelves. Interest was high. I garnered interviews with Radio Kerry in Tralee, Clare FM in Ennis, and Limerick Radio. Appeared on Chicago's WGN Noonday News and Brian Noonan's radio talk show, along with a few local cable networks. After much research looking through Irish records and meeting neighbors and family in counties Kerry and Roscommon, I learned that my 4 great-grandparents survived the famine, and that experience devastated their memories and their spirit, causing them to raise their children, my grandparents, with a raw sense of survival at any cost. Finding the missing pieces to the puzzle of their past helped me to understand my parents' circumstances and how they became the people they were. Norristown, Pennsylvania, 1959. 11-year-old Sherry hears familiar sounds of her father's footsteps in the hallway. He enters the kitchen and without a word hurries towards the laundry room, his jaw tight. A heart-stopping thud prompts Sherry to drop her spoon to the counter. For a split second, she's torn between getting involved or staying in place. Then she hears her mother's cry for help. She rushes from the kitchen to the laundry room just in time to see her father push her mother against the washing machine. Forcing herself between them, she locks eyes with him, determined to keep her breathing steady, even though she wants to run and hide. Blood roars through her veins, her back moist from sweat. A moment of silence stretches as she and her father stare at each other. She in disbelief, and he, intimidating and unnerving. Fierce, she returns the glare and stands her ground. Sherry's mother escapes the madness, only to find herself back in it when she runs off with her daughters to Chicago to live with her mother, Sarah. Forced to live in the psychiatric arena of their grandmother's world creates a new kind of hell, fraught with inevitable failure. Sherry and her sister discover early on how to navigate these treacherous emotional storms by keeping family secrets, honoring their mother's silence. Until one day, when it all unravels. This memoir encourages readers to consider the kinds of small events and reactions that translate to lasting legacies, creating a spirited story that follows home, school, and community life with equal fervor and revelations. Whether it be the nuns who attempt to dampen the child's spirit, or a brother's sudden disappearance. Chicago, 1962. Disbelief settles in before reality hits. Their brother's clothes have disappeared. His suits, shirts, coats that hung on either side of the French doors have vanished. His stack of shoeboxes stored on the steps, gone. Bonnie runs to check for his suitcases underneath the bed. Sherry hurries to the bathroom to check the windowsill. His shaver, toothbrush, hairbrush, and cologne, all missing. They search for a note, a clue, anything to tell them what happened to their brother's things. They're frozen, rooted in place. Sherry's stomach twists. Veil of Silence holds a specific purpose in telling its story: to break the pattern of silence and suffering, and the tendency to pass this secrecy to future generations. In Veil of Silence, readers gain a sense of daily life, home atmosphere, and underlying influences on choices and perspectives that permeated Sherry's home. Veil of Silence reaches into and beyond the Irish community with a story that illustrates the importance of communication and growth. My books are available on my website, www.findingmyirish.com, as well as Amazon. I encourage you to take a look at my other books, Finding My Irish, which is a fascinating story chronicling my touching, at times, surprising search for family. Far from recounting a sterile search through records, I involve the reader in my quest, using rich descriptions of the Irish countryside, along with the many characters I meet along the way. My second book, Finding Your Chicago Irish, is an entertaining and comprehensive to-do list for Irish culture in Chicago. Join me as I steer the readers beyond the shamrocks and green beer and into the heart and soul of Irish Chicago. My books are available on Amazon as well as my website, www.findingmyirish.com. You can also contact me through my email, irishgal45@gmail.com. Thank you, and enjoy IVAM.